All right, we're going to go ahead. Welcome everybody to our session on universal design for learning. We're going to be talking about the who, what, how, all of that in universal design on a very, very rudimentary level. Where this presentation was developed to be an introduction to universal design for folks mostly who are just getting acquainted with the whole idea. And I think Eric's got something for us to get started with, just so we can get an idea of what your experience is with universal design.
That I've linked to a Google form to just sort of take a quick poll of what everyone's familiarity with UDL is. And if you downloaded the presentation that I linked in the chat earlier, it's also there as a link, as you can see on our screen share right now. So just take a second. It's just one question, and we'll take a look at the results here in just a second. Cool. The results are rolling in, and the pie chart is updating. Got a lot of people who, about a third of us right now, a little bit more than that now, 40% use it in classes all the time. That's great. There's people mentioning different learning styles. Okay. And then we have a few who have heard the term, but it's still kind of new. Heard the term, but that's all. All right, cool.
All right. Okay, so we have a mixture here. And we would invite anyone who has anything to add, those of you who have used Universal Design for Learning, please participate. Give us your input in the chat as we keep going forward here. First of all, let's just talk about what it is. Now, we want to make the distinction here between Universal Design for Learning and accommodations to meet an accessibility need. Universal Design for Learning encompasses all students, not just those who need an accommodation. No two people learn the same way. Doesn't matter where they come from. Everybody's different. Then we have students who need an accommodation that is only unique to them. I mean, so it's one change, one time, one person. And what we're trying to do is to make it so that we don't have to worry about that one change, one time, one person, if we try to accommodate the most students we can to start out from the beginning. And like Tobin says in his book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, we'll never get rid of the need to make a change one time for one person accommodation, but we can greatly lower the need for that through the use of UDL practices. And that's what we're going to talk about. So first, let's look at some barriers that we have that might be barriers to learning in any given class, in any different age group. We've got a lot of different things that can create a barrier to learning. Since we think about learning happening in the cognitive realm a lot of times, what are things that people have on their minds that keep them from listening to what is going on in a class or participating fully? And we've seen a lot of these. And we experienced a lot of these just in the last year. What we're trying to do here is come up with a lot of different ways to make learning interesting so that they don't have to ask for special treatment, but they can participate fully in the whole learning idea. And there are a couple of different ways that we can do this. We have barriers that include time, connectivity, disability. We had access in general. But this kind of goes beyond, because this is where inclusion and pulling in equity and diversity also plays in. because it isn't just people with disabilities that we have to think about. We're thinking about different kinds of learners from different kind of backgrounds. We have more and more veterans than we've had before. We have first generation students more so than we've had before. They kind of approach things a little bit differently. And if any of you have gotten into the Gen Z, Gen Alpha, following that kind of stuff that's coming through lately, then we've got all this generational differences we have to deal with too. But really, I think you can get bogged down if you think about all those different groups. So how are we not going to get bogged down? Well, think about how your students now, if you've been teaching that long, from 15 years, how are students today different from those 15 years ago? And we'll ask this rhetorically so that we can have time for discussion. We won't go through a whole lot of polls here. But and then the second question is, how are you different from the teachers that you had, whether in high school, college, whatever? How do you do things differently than they did? And my guess is you probably already do. Eric, you want to take it from here?
Yeah. So I was actually just going to say, feel free if you want to respond to these. Like Lydia said, we're not going to take a ton of time, but feel free to kind of respond to these or throw ideas in the chat as we're kind of going, because the chat can be a really good kind of side thing happening at the same time that we are presenting. And then we can always call back to it. And like Lydia said, we'll definitely have time at the end for discussion or question and answer, like, if other people wanted to talk or if we wanted to focus on the chat. So all that stuff is great. So definitely feel free to throw stuff in there. But we'll go ahead and jump to the next. So universal design for learning, it's been around for a while, and it's pretty heavily researched, and it's a set of design principles based on neuroscience and how people learn. So a few people in the poll referenced learning styles, and it's interesting that there's a lot of competing different research about this, and there's a lot of different ways of thinking of learning styles, but really we don't think of it so much as styles as we do preferences. So you might prefer to learn something one way, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn a different way. So the great thing about UDL principles is that when we put the different means of interacting and engaging with material and content and assessments, that we allow people to sort of migrate to their preference as much as possible. So let's look a little bit more about that. So these are just a real quick rundown of UDL's ways for lowering barriers. And so it's three main things. It's about the why, what, and how of learning. So, how do we motivate learners? You want to consider interests and provide a choice of ways to engage in material. And then if you want to engage people with different kinds of media, so you want to present information multiple ways, because some people might learn better from text-based things. Some people might learn better from auditory-based things. So if you provide the multiple means of engagement there, of engaging with the content, it can help people gravitate to what they're more interested in or the medium that makes more sense to them. And then finally, differentiating the way students can express themselves. And this is one that I can focus on a lot, and I'll save it for later because we're going to hit on that a little bit later. But that's one that I tried to use the most when I was in the classroom, is those different ways of expressing what you know or what you've learned. And just real quickly, I'm going to throw this link in the chat too, but I'm also going to hop over to it on the screen share, and it might be a little hard to see. I'm going to see if I can blow it up just a bit. This is actually from CAST, the company, or sorry, the organization that developed the UDL principles, the UDL guidelines. So they have a really nice detailed table, and it can be a little overwhelming if you're new to UDL. So definitely take it piece by piece. But these are all really good ways of, this is a really great explanation of it, of the different ways in which you can apply UDL, the UDL framework to your teaching. So, like we said before, here's multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And each of these things here is actually a link. So you can go in and dig into examples. So if you're like, man, I really want to include more action and expression options in my course or in my class, in my teaching, then you can come in and just focus on some of these things. And so this is a really great resource. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's linked on our presentation too. And like I said, I linked it in the chat. But that's something that's really great if you're ready to really dig in and hit some UDL stuff.
One thing to keep in mind, and you'll notice that they use the brain, of course, for each of these areas of learning, the affective, the recognition networks, and the strategic networks. The important thing to remember here is, and beyond preferences, the brain never works in isolated things like these pictures are. I mean, all of those areas that are lit up in those images there work at the same time. They're all interacting with one another all the time. So one supposed style or preference of learning might be what somebody is most comfortable with, but it may not be the way that they learn the best. And so having other options available to enhance the learning, even though they may not like it as well. And anybody who's had to do group work in graduate school can probably identify with that. We all hated group work, right? But turns out group work was where we learned the most. So Aaron's saying, group work. And Tracy makes a good point too here, Eric, that we're fighting for learner attention. And the thing to think about here, and I like the fact that the CAST site lists the why of learning first. Now, that's affective networks. That involves emotion, that involves feelings, it involves motivation, all of those things. The why of learning is really important, and I would highly recommend that you take a listen to Simon Sinek, who wrote a book called Start with Why, for a good rationale of making that your starting place for any of the UDL's decisions you make. Why are you making this change? Why are you adding this activity? Why? Who's going to benefit here? We've left out a who on the three things here, but who is inherent in every one of them. So let's go on and talk about some of the ways that we can address different kinds of learning preferences. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so just quickly, Lydia and I definitely have more of a background in online, but we do want to call out that this is something you can do in physical spaces as well. So something just as simple as posting your lesson goals or your objectives, and this could be applicable at any level. I know my previous life was in K-12, and so I'm used to things like anchor charts and those sorts of things up on the walls and all that. And so we don't think of that as much in higher ed, but we do need to think about in higher ed, for those of you that are higher ed, being clear on our objectives and making sure students know why we're talking about the things we're talking about. And then assignment options, so different things you can do in the physical space, getting people up, moving them around, and that kind of goes along with flexible workspaces. So different, your space itself can influence how people learn. So if you've got, just everything straight up rows and that's all you ever do, that doesn't always work, especially if students are engaging in group work. It may be helpful to kind of move them in a circle or move them into groups of 4 or give them that flexibility. And then finally, regular feedback. So just kind of, and this is true in physical spaces and in online spaces, that kind of regular feedback loop that we want to try and establish with our students is really, really helpful. Lydia, you want to add anything before I jump to the next one?
No, but we're going to mention spaces again. So just kind of keep that in mind. Keep going.
So one of the biggest things when you're adopting anything new in your teaching is the time investment, right? And I, like I said, my previous life was in K-12 and I was a technology, for those of you that are technology integration specialists, I understand the joys and the struggles, because that's what I did for several years. And when you're always trying to, you're trying to share ideas or try and get new practices being included, it's a battle because it's always that time investment that you're always hit with that. I don't have time to do that, or I don't have time to remake my class. I don't have time to remake these assignments. And UDL sounds like a really big time investment, but really the key is starting small. So we have a couple different resources on this slide, and I can take a second here and link them in the chat too if necessary. But these are just things to explore. So if you're someone who's higher ed, CAST has a specific UDL and higher ed site that's a little bit more applicable to higher ed settings. And then UDL, a teacher's guide, is a little bit more geared toward K-12. But they're both really good, actually, for anything, because CAST stuff is really universal. So again, I encourage everyone to explore these resources when you get the chance, and there's a lot of good stuff. No matter what level you're on, you can find some resources. Lydia, do you want to add anything?
Not yet. Not yet. I think the next slide is really where we need to go next.
Yep. All right. So like the slide says, and I try my best not to read slides, but the principles sound great and all this, but what does it look like in real implementation? Because we could talk all day about the the neuroscience and all that cool stuff, but let's talk about what it really looks like in an implementation. So one of the things that you can start with when you're just starting small and looking where you can apply some of these things is ask yourself, where are learners always running into the same problems? Where are they always having the same questions? Because we all teach the same thing multiple times. And, we kind of get that, okay, this is where students usually struggle, or this is a hard test, or this is a difficult concept. So find those spots. And sometimes we can call those pain points or pinch points, like those really difficult things in your class. And then ask yourself, okay, what can I do? What can I add? Is there a different way that I can either maybe assess this or present this, or at least give some options to students to maybe kind of bridge this understanding gap that they have? Lydia, do you want to say anything before we jump? I don't want to cut you off if we.
Oh, no. I'm good. Keep going. Eric's just heading towards this direction. We have to start small when we get into the whole idea, because I don't know about you, but when I first heard about universal design for learning, it was kind of like, okay, I get the concept, but what does it look like when you actually implement it, and how can you possibly meet all of these different learning preferences all at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the short answer is you can't. So you have to start small, and your own brain can't encompass it all really fast. So we are following Thomas Tobin's advice in using the +1 approach. Pick one thing in your course, one thing that is that pinch point or that pain point that Eric mentioned. What is the one thing that students stumble at that you might be able to change something? It might be in the content that you change. So if it's text now, maybe you could add a podcast that's audio or a vodcast video. Or would you change something in the way you assess that? If you have a multiple choice test, would an essay test be easier, or an essay itself be easier? If you assign papers, what about having students create a video instead, or create an infographic, or some other option? Some way that you can assess whether or not the students have grasped the concept that isn't the same way, so students can have a choice. And Eric, you actually did this in your high school classes, right?
Yeah, back when I taught social studies, I taught world history in rural West Virginia, and so it was about the least interested group of teenagers you could get in front of you to hear about ancient Egypt and all that. But what I tried to do was give them some options and some choices to do different things. I was really lucky that my school district was 1-to-1 with iPads, so we could use a lot of different technology tools to try and make things a little bit more engaging. And so I would always try to add multimedia options to the general, like, okay, if you want to take a test or if you want to do a quiz, whatever, you can do that because that works for some people. But if you want to display your knowledge in another way, so we did things like podcasts, or I had them do sway presentations or PowerPoint presentations. And I didn't use those in addition to tests always. Sometimes I use them in place of. So it was giving students those different ways of interacting with everything and different ways to show me what they had learned. And the important thing to think about is, and we'll probably hit this later, but I want to go ahead and hit it now because I know people are probably thinking about it. Is like, okay, so I'm going to give my students maybe 3 options. Maybe I'm going to let them write a paper or do a video or make a presentation. That I've just used that example because that's what I normally did. And then you think to yourself, okay, that means I have to write 3 sets of directions. I have to write 3 rubrics, and I have to do all this stuff. So now I've basically given myself 3 times the work. Don't do that. So I'm going to say it's difficult, and it's a big time investment at the front end, but you'll thank yourself if you take a hard look at your rubrics and directions and try to make them as universal as possible as well. So for me, in my example of history classes, I took out the specific technical things out of my rubric. So it wasn't like, you have to have this many words or this many paragraphs or this many pages in an essay, and or this many slides in a PowerPoint presentation, or this many minutes in a video. I focused on the actual content stuff that was universal to everything. So I'd say, okay, you've got to cite sources, because everybody, no matter what medium you were using, you had to cite sources. Then I'd say you have to include, these different your stuff has to be historically accurate. And then I'd focus on a few of the other mechanical things that are universal to every platform. So like grammar, for example, could be universal to every platform. You're writing grammar, presentations have to have correct grammar. And then when you're speaking in a video, you have to have correct grammar. So like I said, it's a big front end investment, but all this stuff is, but then it really pays off in the end when you have that universal sort of rubric in addition to your different options, because that saves you time, and it's clearer to the students too, because I guarantee because I can tell you this happened to me when I did write multiple directions and multiple rubrics when I was just starting out. Students would come up to me after I explained everything, and then they'd say, okay, I get this, but can you just tell me what the easiest thing or what's going to get me the best grade is? And so that's what they were focused on. And so I found that having just one set of everything just kind of let them really be free to gravitate toward what they wanted to do. And another quick point, I know I'm talking too much, but another quick point about this is that don't be bummed out if students don't take advantage of the different options you give them, because that did happen to me. I did an assignment one time where I was like, you could do anything, man. You could write a paper, you could do a PowerPoint presentation, you could do all these different, and I threw out 5 different tech tools because it was a small class. So I had the luxury of having 8 students in front of me, and that was pretty good. And no one did anything except write a paper, and one person did a presentation, PowerPoint, the thing they'd been doing for 10 years at that point. Cause these were juniors and seniors. So they, this one, I referenced world history earlier, just in case anyone is K-12 and is now confused by my past. This was in a sociology class, so this could be anybody. And so everybody just did the thing they were most familiar with, which is okay. And just because no one took advantage of the other things, you don't have to be bummed out about it, because at least you offered the choice. Student autonomy is a big thing. And just saying to them, hey, you've got this option, even if you don't take it, that's helpful to let them know, hey, I could have done this if I wanted to, but I got to choose what I wanted to do. Instead of being dictated to by me, they got to say, I want to do this. And so just that little extra motivation of, okay, I chose this, or, hey, I had the option to choose something else if I wanted to, can be really helpful.
Yeah, and having a sense of agency over their own learning is really a key part of all this. So giving students choices gives them that kind of agency. And some of the choices that we want to, just kind of throw up just for ideas to start here. Next slide, Eric, is some examples of how you might have more than one option for something. We've already mentioned a lot of these, but things to think about even outside the box. We've got some new information that's come to light. 2 books have been published this year. one by WVU Press by Susan Rock about minding bodies, including that talks about the actual physical space that you use in the way you present information or the way that you assess information. And there are a lot of good ideas in that. The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul is another book that covers the same kind of territory, in that you sometimes have to get out of this cognitive mode in order to get the cognitive mode to work, so that you get into the environment in general. To get next to a tree, perhaps, it might make a difference, who knows. But the difference in spaces makes a big difference. And Eric already alluded to the rows and columns of desks, or the amphitheater style of desk. Well, there are a lot more different kind of classrooms now that you can choose from, where you can move the tables around and you can move screens around. You can do all kinds of flexible things. And those kinds of space opportunities can offer new kinds of learning opportunities as well. Okay, Smita's asking if as we give examples from both higher ed and K-12, she wants to mention the book UDL in the Cloud by Tom Thibodeau and Katie Novak. They discuss how to put UDL covers on both pedagogy and andragogy, which of course is adult learning. That's an excellent resource. Thanks, Smita. Then let's go to the next slide, because there's some tools that you can use, just kind of ideas to consider as you're talking about spaces and different options in terms of audio, text, video, whatever. So let's look at some of those tools, Eric.
Just real quick before we move on, Lydia, I want to call out just a couple things that I thought of that I should have mentioned earlier and forgot about. But first, I do want to call out in the chat. Sophie mentioned that it's difficult to get teachers reflecting regularly, or if you're higher ed, maybe it might be difficult to find that time. Or if you are a teacher, I guess. If you're in the classroom, it's difficult to find that time to reflect, right? And if you're someone who's in a position like mine, or what I'm assuming Sophie's probably is, where you are a support person, it's difficult to sort of engage teachers and instructors in that reflective process. And I definitely empathize with that. It is very difficult, and sometimes it can be just as simple as starting that conversation. Maybe if you can get it, if you're a TIS or instructional coach or something like that, if you can get into the classroom just for a few minutes, just to observe, or if you just maybe can stop by and say, hey, what's going on? Are your students, even if it's just an informal conversation, not really a formal reflecting process, that could be a helpful way to kind of get in. One of the instructional coaches I used to work with a long time ago said that she always referred to it as planting a seed. So even if she just had a really short conversation with a teacher, she just wanted to kind of plant the seed of, maybe we can try something, or maybe, we can look at something, or maybe we can have a longer conversation later on.
That's a good point. There also, that reflection part is often missed. It's like the emotional aspect of learning that we've often missed. But I think a lot of instructors are finding now that having a reflective journal is providing a lot more information than some tests can provide when they're assessing their students' learning as well.
And the other thing I wanted to just say really quickly is, and those of you that are familiar with UDL and use it in the past, I'm going to be saying something that but the great thing about universal design for learning and thinking about it in this way, and we say like text and video options for content, audio with captioning, is that people that don't need that as an accommodation per se will still use it and really benefit from it. So people like me who have small children, subtitles are like the greatest thing ever, because then I can be like viewing things and not having the sound going, like if I'm trying to get my 1-year-old to go to sleep, or I don't actually get to do a lot of things for myself until my kids go to bed. And so, if I'm in the living room watching shit, like my wife and I have a couple of shows that we watch all the time, and we're in the living room and the kids' rooms are like right upstairs, and if I had it at the volume I wanted, it'd wake the kids up. So I got to have the subtitles on so that I don't miss things. And honestly, it's something I like to do all the time, even when I don't actually need it. Like I wear headphones all the time. Whenever I'm watching stuff on the computer, I still turn the subtitles on. It helps me to have that multi-mode thing, but I don't have any hearing issues at all. So it's kind of a, these things will be taken advantage of by a lot of people, and it's really helpful to offer them. So if you needed the extra kick, like if you're like, man, I don't know if I really want to get into like all that, it's definitely worth it, because even the students that don't actually need it per se will take advantage of it and benefit from it.
That's right. Ramps were initially for wheelchairs, but mothers with baby strollers use them all the time.
Not just mothers, Lydia. The fathers who push the stroller benefit.
Push the strollers too. Right. Okay, here's some tools you can look at to help. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the majority of some of these things. Some of them are conceptual. Some of them are actual applications online, like the Google apps and all that kind of thing. You've all probably had some experience just recently with Jamboard and Padlet and some of the others in sessions during this conference. I know I have. One of the things that I'm going to mention that is becoming more and more relevant that we're seeing, and this deals with spaces, is physical movement. We're finding that, sitting still and being quiet is not the best way to learn a lot of times, particularly, if you have students who are ADHD students, they can't sit still anyway, but they can learn if you let them move. So how are you going to let them move? So what kind of physical stuff can you do? And what they find too is that retention increases when students use their hands to talk about something. If they can demonstrate something using their hands. And I can remember as a child, somebody holding my hands and saying, "Now talk." And it was so hard. So keep in mind that new ways to do things in a classroom, in the delivery, not necessarily the assessment or any of that, in delivering the content, how can you introduce more physical movement into that process as well? And that's a new thing too. That's an extra way to get the brain moving in a different direction than it has before, opening up new doors. Yes, Eric, we know you talk with your hands all the time. But so
the camera is like a boon to me, because I'd just be here waving my hands around like if I didn't have my camera on, and it'd probably look even more crazy than I do now.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found very helpful about VoiceThread. If I wanted to give feedback to a student, for instance, on an assignment, then I could use my hands to describe concepts that I'm talking about. And I don't look like just a plain old talking head. I've actually got something that I'm trying to express with more of myself. Team hand talkers. Oh, yes. So we got another one in there. Well, we've kind of gone through this pretty fast, and we want to have some time for questions. Let's pull up the last slide. We're going to leave you with a lot of resources. This last slide has a lot of links to the CAST site, etc. There's also at the bottom, you'll see a link for a Trello board. If you've never used the Trello app, it's an online app. Originally for project management, but I use it for a lot of other things too. And I've created a Trello board that is public that you can access, that I occasionally add curated resources for UDL and a few other things like active learning, etc. So feel free to access that. There are a couple podcasts that we can recommend. Anytime Thomas Tobin is interviewed in a podcast or a webcast, it is worth checking out. He is a great speaker, and he has been involved with universal design for a long time. Think UDL is another podcast that concentrates only on universal design. The coordinator from Appalachian State University for Universal Design does that one. There is a consultant named Louie Lord Nelson who has a UDL in 15 Minutes podcast that is quite informative and very nice podcast. She has a lot of tools too. She's got this neat little card game called Go Fishing with UDL. You can get ideas and brainstorm ideas as to how to do things differently with some of the stuff that she offers. The books, of course, that I'm showing here, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, is the quintessential book that is published by West Virginia University Press that we highly recommend. And the other one, UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Flexible Learning Landscapes, was only published, I think, just in the last month or two. It's brand new. The authors, I did read it to make sure that it had some useful stuff in it. The authors offer an awful lot of things that they have tried and had had success with in their delivery and use of UDL principles. So tangible things that can give you ideas, because there's no way that we can give you every how-to in a short presentation like this. So any questions or comments at this point? Oh, Sophie's talking about a cyber safety video each year. Hey, Sophie, can you get on and tell us more about that cyber safety video? If Adam will give you access there.
Hi.
Hey, tell us about this.
I'm in a public school, middle school this year. I've been middle school and high school. I'm a technology and curriculum specialist. It's like a TIS and an instructional coach all wrapped up in one. And to be follow our guidelines and get E-rate money and stuff, we have to educate the kids in cyber safety. So we try to find videos that are fun for them to watch and not as boring. But we have some students that are deaf or hard hearing, and we definitely pushed the 1 year I was at the high school to have the closed captioning on all of the videos that we ever presented. And we had I'm also a hand talker, if you didn't know, an ASL translator in the room as well, when there wasn't closed captions. And when we first played the videos with the closed captions on there, I was actually shocked at how much more attentive the entire student's body was compared to previous years when we didn't play the closed captions. They even came up to me afterwards and said that they were reading them when they didn't even need them. That, like, we only had 1 or 2 students that were really needed it, but it benefited everybody. And I actually taught in the science classroom this same kid in the middle school the previous years, and everything that I did to help benefit her benefited everybody in the classroom. Having more visuals, making sure that the closed captions were there, making sure that I had another way of explaining it that was not just auditory, helped all of my students, not just her. And that was a real eye-opening moment for me as a teacher, and then therefore as a coach, to help my teachers realize that it's beneficial to step outside of your comfort zone if you're a traditional teacher to help all of your kids.
I want to make a pitch too for here. We want to make sure that we are closed captioning and doing the things that we know that are good accessibility practices, and we want to reach the students who don't have all 5 senses or need that extra help. But I want to make a pitch here too, not to forget the students who don't need that accommodation, who may have other reasons for not learning the way that we want them to. And so don't forget that for people who are sighted, who may not have an accommodation need, vision is the #1 sense in the human brain. If you read brain studies, the most powerful sense that we have, and the first one that people gravitate to, is visual. So you can't discount it for everybody else. So while you're making things in different forms for folks that you know are going to have a problem, that is definitely the baseline goal, but you don't want to forget the rest of your students either. When I teach a class on readability in the online class, I have a lot of students who, once they are exposed to color blindness for the first time, they're thinking, oh my God, all right, some colorblind people can't see this, so I'm not going to use any color at all. Well, 95% of your students can see color and are influenced greatly by it, so you don't want to leave them out. So figure out ways to make sure that both get the idea of emphasis. So color is not the only way you do something. If you're using color, make it bold or make it italic or make it look different, some other visual way that a person who can't see color might see some distinction. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, and I'm sure that within your school systems and your universities and colleges that there are people who are willing to help you with that.
I do also, since we're on the subject of captioning, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention auto captioning. And auto captioning is great, but for things to actually be marked as accessible or actually meet accessibility standards, it does have to be at least reviewed by a human. So I can use myself as an example. I'm pretty lucky. I have kind of like a standard accent, and I speak pretty clearly. My microphone's pretty decent, so my auto captions are almost always 100% on. Like when I upload something to YouTube and the auto captions hit, usually I just have to go in and put punctuation in or fix maybe like one or two words. But if you have any kind of accent or anything like that, auto captions definitely need to be reviewed and checked, because while they're great as the starting point for captioning and things like that, the machines almost always miss something. Even if you're like me and it catches just about everything, there's usually something that it misses.
Amy asks, what approaches have people tried to help students explore alternative assessments? And I think that's a good area to hone in on. Somebody in the crowd, what have you used? Okay, Sophie's used automations in machines like YouTube and TikTok. I bet they can be hilarious, Sophie.
I definitely encourage anyone to either, if you want to jump on the mic and talk in response to Amy's question, or throw it in the chat as I see Emily's done, encourage exploration on low stakes. Yeah, that's actually exactly the example I was going to give. So thanks, Emily, for putting that probably in a more concise terms than I was going to say. One of the things I did was I tried to engage my students in a lot of different forms of multimedia, because again, I was a technology person for a while. And so before I gave them that option for an assignment or for an assessment, I would have them do like a quick exercise with it, something low stakes and something I almost always did something non-content related. So when I first taught my students how to use, if anyone's familiar with Sway, it's like the Office 365, like Prezi answer, I guess is the best way to put it. It's sort of like a more fun PowerPoint. Fun, so to speak. So before I started offering my students, using Sway on things, I was like, hey, let's learn how to use Sway. So everybody had to learn how to use Sway real quick. And so I was like, all right, just tell me something you're interested in. So some of my kids did their like favorite athlete or, favorite TV show or something like that. And it took like half an hour. Of course, I had the benefit of being in block scheduling, so I had them in front of me for 90 minutes anyway. So, but it took like half an hour, so like a third of the class, and they played around with Sway. They had some fun. They got to do something they were interested in, and then they got to share that interest. And it was good practice, not only for the tool, but also for presenting. So like Emily said, I think those low stakes, sort of even sometimes even non-content related practice runs with those different things you want to do are good ways to kind of introduce students to them.
Sometimes just collaborative games to start out with will give you a great idea as to whether or not they're getting the concepts that you're trying to get across, or the procedures, or the steps. Some of the collaborative spreadsheets that I've participated in can have shown how you can do that. And Jamboards and things like that. Well, what did you get out of this lesson? I switched from using quizzes to having reflective journals in my class, and I called them 5-minute reflections. And in those 5-minute reflections, which they may have spent more or less time on, I don't know, told me more about what they actually got out of each lesson than I ever got out of a quiz. All right, some of the other examples that are coming up here.
Brought up modeling. Modeling is a fantastic way to say, hey, this is how you do it, kind of thing. So yeah, like Lydia talked about using VoiceThread, which those of you who are, if there's anyone who's not familiar with VoiceThread, it's basically kind of a multimedia threaded conversation application. So like I could, what's that?
Just like Flipgrid.
Yeah, it's very similar to Flipgrid.
Yeah.
So it's really cool just to kind of throw it out there and be like, this is what it is, kind of deal, and let everyone see. So yeah, modeling is a fantastic way to do that.
Yeah. See, school courses help give examples of options. Oh yeah. Great ideas. Sophie says, how did you guide those reflections? Well, I'm teaching graduate students. You've got middle schoolers. There's a difference in audience. So I think we probably have to assess what's the best approach for that kind of thing. Anything that I teach outside of that course, I'm teaching in an area that doesn't have grades. I'm teaching acting students or thespians or something like that, and we don't give grades for that, but I assess their learning by giving them a lot of feedback. So the one thing that I do know about reflections is there has to be a way to give them feedback built in, so that if the reflection is way off base, if what they got is not what you intended, then there has to be a means of feedback, and I would say pretty quick, to make sure that they don't make the mistake the next time they move into the next territory that you're going into. Any other thoughts you have, Eric, at this point? Anybody else? Oh, Sophie, here's what I did, actually. Sophie asked if I gave him a prompt. Yes, I did. I said, just tell me everything you learned. And if you don't have an idea what you want to write, here's 4 headlines. Just answer these questions. And so I directed their thoughts, and they could expand on that. But yes, I did give them a guideline.
It's really similar to what I used to do in essay questions, because getting students to write essay responses in a history class is like pulling teeth. And so I'd basically give them like a structure. I'd basically give them the main idea of what each of their paragraphs would be in a question form, and then say, you fill in the details. And so, in a reflection, it's not exactly the same, but you can structure it kind of in the same way, where you sort of lay down the structure and say, okay, what were your thoughts on this? What were your thoughts on this? What were your thoughts on this? Rather than being like, what'd you learn today? Which can be really good, by the way. That's not a bad way to do it at all. But if you find that your students that doesn't really speak to your students, then offering that additional scaffold is definitely helpful.
Right. I think the questions I used were, what did you learn this week that you never knew before? What did you get reminded of that you knew but you forgot? What questions do you still have? And anything else you want to write.
Well, I think we pretty much at the time. Any final words, Lydia? I think we're good.
I think we're good. The resources are there, and just feel free to reach out to us anytime you need that. Mm-hmm. That Trello board is there all the time, so feel free to access that. I continually update stuff as I find it. Thanks, Smita, for the new resource that I didn't know about. I really appreciate your participation today too. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll see you in UDL universe, I guess.
We appreciate it. You'll crack up at this. Sophie asked if we have any openings at the Teaching and Learning Commons.
Well, that's funny. Yeah, I'm planning on retiring, but not this year. Sophie's after my job.
Actually just mentioned something in Teams. It was a good idea. I wonder if we could, if Analyzer's still here, could we get? I wonder if we could get a recording of this for the. Okay, could we get a recording of this for? We have a UDL group, and this might be a good thing to share with them. I didn't even think of that. If we could get our hands on this recording, I don't know how protected it is. Okay. Yes. Awesome.
Well, yeah. Our group is mostly all of us who are attending this conference. Anyway,
I was thinking of the grant participants too.
Oh, the grant participants. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Oh, that would be great, Annalisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The UDL, the more I listen to podcasts about this, the more interesting it becomes. And the more I think about how I interact with the students that I don't have in a school setting that I'm teaching or directing, for a theater thing or something. I mean, the learning that goes on it's just mind-blowing. And the techniques are the same. We're actually applying those same UDL ideas in these informal learning situations. Sometimes I think the formal learning situations could learn from the informal ones.
Yeah, and I was thinking, since you're talking about applying it to other settings, I was thinking if we were really cool, we would have known everything we were going to say and put them in the speaker notes on our presentation, because that would have been a good UDL thing. But we aren't that cool.
Yeah, well, our minds kind of go around like pinball. Yep. So but the more you think about it, though, it's sometimes ideas just pop in from some of the comments that people are making in the chat, and that makes a big difference too. That's a good thing, though. Mm-hmm. That stimulates those brain pathways that we didn't think about.
Yep. Well, I figure we probably got to jump out so that the next sessions could be started up. So.
Yeah. It looks like we've got some stragglers though too. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think, are our emails in that thing, Lydia, in that presentation?
I think they're in our profiles.
Okay.
For the registration. So.
Even if you're not at WVU, definitely feel free to reach out. Like I said, I love talking, teaching, and I used to be a TIS. So if anybody's a TIS, for real, reached out. Even if you just need to be like, man, I can't get anybody to do anything, because I've been there. So, okay. Alrighty.
I guess we jump out now, huh?
Yep. Thanks again to whoever's left.